Please ask everyone to mute their microphones. Officers and guests, could you also please turn off your cameras? You should turn on your camera and microphone when you speak, but please turn them back off again afterwards. All councillors must ensure that their cameras remain on. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Social Services Scrutiny Committee on Tuesday, the 10th of January. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and may be broadcast via the authority's internet site. The images and sound recording may also be used for training purposes within the authority. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. So Cabinet Member Julia Jenkins has sent her apologies. Councillor Claire Jones.
Be leaving at 4:10 for about 20 minutes to 30 minutes, and rather than put my hand up and interrupt the meeting, I'll just let you know now.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. Have we had any other apologies? Okay, thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Are any members or officers, do any members or officers have any interest they wish to declare? Nope. Agenda item 3, budget update position. This is on pages 5 to 16. So, so Julia was going to introduce the report, but I'll hand you straight over to Lisa Curtis-Jones, who will outline the report on the social services budget position up to month 9, December 22, and scrutiny members will consider the current expenditure and projections up to the end of the financial year.
Can I speak on red or green? I never know. Okay. Right, apologise, I can't see anyone now because I've had to change glasses to read from the screen. So, so the scrutiny members last meeting requested a report on the social services budget. So the report in front of you is up to month 7, and we're currently in month 9. So what I'm reporting is the position we were in at that stage then, and I can sort of give some verbal update as we go through. As we start to recover from COVID, then obviously we've seen some increase in demands on the service. And that's obviously evidenced in the budget spend, because you will see as we go through this considerable overspend as we speak. And we've obviously got the cost of living crisis and higher costs for the commissioned services, which is impacting on the budget. The report highlights the summary statement of the general fund revenue budget. So that's as at 31st of October 22, and that's for this financial year. And there's also information there about how we're trying to mitigate the overspend as we go through, but there's more detail across children and adult services in there. As you know, budgets within social care can be very unpredictable, certainly in the sense that children looked after rates and adults requiring support for care and support needs can change in a very short space of time. And you'll see only having to turn on the news that there's major pressures at the minute in adult services around hospital discharge, and that obviously will impact on our budget. Where we were, social services have always had sort of issues around the financial pressures, and there's certainly been major pressures in the last 2 to 3 years because of COVID. However, we were in a very good position in that at the end of the financial year 21-22, we ended up with an underspend because of the grants and support we'd had through Welsh Government because of the COVID crisis. We also continue to have regional support through the Regional Integrated Fund, which you will have been aware of, that used to be called the Integrated Care Fund, so the ICF. We've invested monies in the past around changing structures, for example, in the children's services to create the supporting change team, and that has had a big impact on our CLAR demographic and some of the really good work around the reduction strategy. The section 5 of the report goes through the detail of the budget. So that is at 31st of October. I won't propose to go through that in detail because it's quite lengthy, but you can see if people have had the chance to go through each budget line where the pressures are and where the overspends are. And then the second, where am I? Appendix 5 in the report, you'll see the major variances, which the underspends and the overspends in detail, which I guess that'll be the areas for questions. At the end of sort of month 7, the budget was a 710 overspend projected. I can say today we have brought that down but it is sort of fingers crossed, I guess, because things change daily with sort of placements and costs. And you'll see some of the detail in the report around the mitigation about the increased cost of a residential placement, for example, as opposed to what we'd budgeted for. Section 6, where we want to be, as you'd expect, we'd want to maintain a balanced budget. And obviously we need to plan for next year's medium-term financial plan, which we're in the middle of doing now. We do meet regularly with Stacey, our accountant, and with head service to look at the budget and the overspend areas and where we can bring those back in track. We use grants to the best way we can. We've used earmarked reserves. We were in a position last year where we could put money into earmarked reserves, so that has assisted in certain budget lines, particularly around the real living wage. And then what we need to do next, then obviously we'll continue those regular meetings. We'll continue to work on a regional basis, and that will be looking at the RIF funding and what regional funding is available. Some of the sort of areas we're looking at around that are the eliminate profit, working that on a regional basis around our CLAR children and about discharge from hospital. We will continue to review demands within children and adult services and review structures to meet that need. And also we'll look at the priorities set out in our annual social services report and within the improvement plan. And part of that will be to look at the transformation of services and possible efficiencies moving forward. We'll do that for Merthyr and we'll do that on a regional basis. So that's a quick sort of whiz through the report, but happy to answer any questions. And I've got Stacey, who's our social services accountant, Taryn, head of service, and Angela's online as head of adult services.
Thank you, Lisa. Opening up for questions then, please. Councillor Ian Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I've heard that adults who are the hospital considers to be medically fit to discharge might be being sent home without packages of care in place. Do we have any cases like that where people are sent home without any packages in place? That was one question, and the other one in the same sort of area on the report, page 6. There are two sentences there, and it may be me being a bit dozy, but they seem to contradict each other. You say safeguarding is a priority, and these costs cannot be avoided. And then almost in the next sentence, you say, we'll endeavour to provide support within the community, but in some cases, this is not possible. So it's just those two things.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas.
Okay, so I'll take the last question first, if that makes sense. And then if Angela's got anything to add then to the discharge bit, she can do that afterwards. I appreciate that that sounds like I'm contradicting it, but the safeguarding will always take priority. And if there's a child at risk or an adult at risk, then cost isn't something that we think about. And that we have to provide, you know, whether it be a placement for a child or a placement for an adult, then we'll do that. And we'll do it to make sure that they're safe. And that would be the priority, that that person is safe. With regards to sort of that community support, then obviously we would look at, you know, what third sector support could be in there. And that's things that perhaps are on a preventative basis as opposed to safeguarding. So there are some things that obviously we'd have to prioritise based on need. And obviously safeguarding would always come first because that's the major priority. With regards to the packages of care, I'm not aware of any cases of people being discharged from hospital without a package of care. However, there are major issues at the moment around sort of delays from hospital. So we may get a referral today that says, you know, a person needs to be discharged and they need a package of care that needs 4 calls. If we can't provide that, then that person will stay in their bed until we can provide the packages of care. And that's the issue at the minute. There's a delay in the system. What we can do, and some of the discussions we've had regionally and with health, is that we've we're looking to commission interim beds within residential so that people could step down into a step down bed and they would stay there until we can put the package of care in place. In theory, we hope that that would only be a number of days or weeks until we can put the package of care into position. But obviously we don't want to put people at risk by discharging them from hospital, sending them home. They need help and they need package care, because what will end up happening is they will end up back in hospital. So ideally we want package of care in place before they're discharged. But there is pressure on the moment to get people out of hospital as soon as possible. So, but Ange, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa, and thanks, Councillor, for the question. Certainly, as far as we're aware at this time, there have been no people discharged. I think if you look along with the publicity around that letter that came from the Chief Nursing Officer and the Chief Medical Officer, I think there's been a lot of resistance from our health colleagues around the safety and validity of making those decisions. So each person is looked at on a risk assessed basis whilst they're in hospital. There have been occasions where the family have chosen to pick up that package and the support for a short period until it can be provided in the community. But as far as I'm concerned at the moment, we haven't had anyone who's been discharged under those arrangements that have been publicly in the media. So.
Thank you. Next we have Clive Tuppy.
Oh, thanks. With regard to residential placements, I notice in reference 12 in the notes, is it right we're paying £16,513 a week for one person in secure accommodation?
Yeah, that is correct. That's a young person's placement and they're currently in secure accommodation. The local authority searched extensively before needing to take that placement. However, due to the risks to that young person and the risks to the community, the placement was required and the court granted a secure order. We've currently developed a plan to step that young person down out of that secure provision that we hope will come to fruition at the start of the next financial year.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Tuppy.
Thanks.
Have you got any more questions, Councillor Tuppy?
No, that's okay for the moment. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So mine is in relation to, I think it's page 14, 13, 14. I think it's number 15 in the table. It's in relation to those professional services, such as DNA and drug testing. Are there options for those costs to be reduced, like different companies? If the companies that we use, if their cost of increase, is that an option to kind of, I don't know, look at other providers?
So Children's Services hold a weekly meeting that's called our resource panel. So any funding for drug and alcohol testing or any other requirements for outside agency support specific to a case comes to that panel. Staff are expected to bring, where possible, to bring 3 quotes and do a balancing exercise to evidence which they think is the most appropriate service to progress forward with. Part of those costs are associated with us looking to safely keep children at home, so increasing the level of testing that we're undertaking so that we can do safe rehabilitation plans. Over the last 2 to 3 years, there's been a significant increase in our level of revocation, which has meant that we've had to do that testing to satisfy ourselves that it is safe for those children to return to the care of a parent or a kinship carer.
Okay, thank you. My next question is in relation to number 18 with the independent safeguarding services. So my interpretation is, so we've got an independent safeguarding officer, but we still contracting outside. Is that right? So you've got somebody in post, but you still asking others to do those children looked after reviews and that. Just talk to me a bit around that. Like, is that value for money because you've got that person in post, but you still, outsourcing for independent ones as well?
So in respect of our independent reviewing team for safeguarding. Previously, all of that service had historically been outsourced, but last year we undertook an activity that looked at service quality and efficiency if we brought proportionally part of that in. What we did was bring proportionally part of the service in last year to see whether that brought financial efficiency and improved the quality of the service being delivered. So that's under review to see whether we continue with a mixed model or whether we bring the service in-house. Because of the fluctuation in children looked after and child protection numbers, it's very hard to project what that level of need will look like, and therefore the associated staff that we need. So it is anticipated that even if we increase the level of in-house service we provide, we would always need to outsource some of that.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Gareth Richards, if you've got a question, because the light is on, but your name isn't on my screen.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. It's the overall potential overspend really that's showing up here. How does that compare with other years? Is it 1 point whatever it is percent predicted overspend?
Obviously in recent years we've underspent, so
Yes.
in comparison
Yeah.
to that, but I think in previous years it's probably in the same sort of ballpark. I
Right,
think.
yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
in the past we have overspent by you know, 1 million plus in some, you know, going back when our residential doubled, you know, within a period of time. So it's probably in sort of this similar sort of region. I think Stacey's just, yeah, it's 1.79% at the minute.
Yeah. Thank you. There are some obviously shown underspends here. Dollars, for example, is an underspend, I think, isn't it? How is that variance occurred? Is it because there hasn't been any applications or any use of dollars in this financial year?
No, I mean, the main reason for that is that we've had considerable grants in because there's going to be a change in legislation that it goes over to Liberty Protects. And obviously staff are going to be trained in that. The underspend is due to the number of grants that we've had in. Plus, we were anticipating the change in legislation. We needed to clear the backlog of cases that had been assessed. So we had put money in reserves for that as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. And coming back into the overspend, it is around the residential care element in the main, which I appreciate, as I've said time and time again, that it's a variable then really. It's something you can't predict from day one. So I accept that. But what form does you say you will continue to monitor? What form will that monitoring take? And it's a shame really the cabinet member isn't here again today, is to ask her what role she plays within that monitoring. But obviously, if you can explain what you do as officers to monitor.
Okay, I mean, Taryn can obviously give more detail to this, but I mean, at the moment, the Welsh Government has obviously got the Eliminate Profit programme going forward. So we are looking to develop our own residential. So in theory, we're hoping that the cost for this will come down if we've got our own residential. And there will be reports coming to Cabinet and Council within the next couple of months to sort of explain those processes. The other thing that doesn't help is that obviously the costs have gone up so much in the, you know, whereas we budgeted for 12 placements because that's what we, you know, predicted in the future, and that's what we've seen in the last couple of years. We've currently got 13 in the system, so obviously we've already got that additional cost. But equally, whereas we may have budgeted for, you know, 210, which was the average, we're now talking 270, you know, £1,000 for a placement because of the cost of living crisis. Plus, we're seeing young people with really high demand needs or really complex needs. Whereas, you know, COVID is, you know, they've got that increase in mental health problems and we're seeing more people coming through. And it's really difficult. We probably could have said, right, we'll put growth in the budget for 14 placements. But we'll, you know, if we didn't use them, we'd be underspent and then there'd be criticism for that as well. So it's about trying that balance as well. But I'm sure Taryn can give you more detail about the sort of the reviews and the process we do for that.
So again, internally within children's services, if a residential placement needs to be made, then there's a matching process that is undertaken to ensure that there's value for money in terms of the placement that is made. We also have quarterly monitoring with all of our residential providers, where we have a contract meeting to make sure that those costs continue to be feasible and reasonable. There's been a number of extensive changes in the market over the last year, which has seen costs escalate like we have never seen before. Part of that has been around programmes for government, and lots of which as a department that we are very invested in, but they have changed the market considerably. So around addressing pay disparity, we know that lots of residential workers have had a significant increase in their pay, which we would advocate for given their skill base, but that has changed the amount that we are paying for placements. We've also seen the Eliminate Profit for Gender from Welsh Government, which has meant that it has created a market sufficiency issue because people have stopped expanding the level of residentials that they are developing in the area. And we also know from Forces information that actually within Cwmtaf Morgannwg, we have a very low residential rate comparatively to other regions across Wales. So whilst we really do monitor the costs and value for the money that we're spending for Merthyr residents, there are a number of external factors that are very much beyond our control. And as was mentioned earlier, there is one young person who is costing in excess of £16,000 a week to support. And when you work that out on an annual average, that would be almost 3 times what we would predict any placement costing. So it's just not about the number of young people who access residential, it's the amount of time that they spend in there. And one young person who costs a significant amount to meet their needs can actually change that cost profile considerably.
I've got a couple more questions going, not so much on the budget itself, but around some of the questions being asked about the advice from the Chief Nursing Officer in Wales about discharges. I became aware, I want to emphasise, not within our county borough, but in another borough where there has been a discharge without any packages being put in place, and social services not been aware that that person had been actually discharged. So I'm pleased to hear Angela saying that as far as Merthyr Borough residents, that hasn't been the case, although I understand it was within the Cwmtaf area. So I'm pleased to hear that. Because obviously there would be, I'm correct in saying, this is a question really, there should be meetings between the hospital discharge and the social worker on discharge. Am I correct in that, Angela, or whoever wants to answer?
Happy to take that one, Councillor Richards.
Yeah.
Not everyone that's discharged from hospital is allocated to social workers. I'm sure you can fully appreciate. If I went in with a broken leg, I wouldn't expect to have a social worker to support me as part of my discharge planning. Where people are identified whilst in hospital as requiring ongoing social care support, then the referral is made to our adult duty, and then it could be quite straightforward. We may not always undertake a hospital-based meeting because we're able to determine what those care needs are and put that package in place to support that person to return home. We tend to keep the hospital discharge planning meetings and the other areas called DST, which is the discharge support tool, which looks at, continuing healthcare against social care support. Those tend to be for the more complex packages of care where a decision is required in terms of someone's capacity. So we would only undertake the hospital based meetings with hospital and family in the more complex cases. If it was pretty straightforward where someone just needed a package of care and that's been identified, then we wouldn't necessarily do that. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Angela, thank you very much. And has there been any discussions between social services and the health board on this specific, the Chief Nursing Officer's advice and about discharge, as far as anyone is aware?
So there's regular meetings at the moment with the health board.
Yeah.
There's been 2 winter summits with them, which included the chief execs as well.
Yeah.
We've got another meeting Thursday with the other directors and we're meeting with health next week. There were 3 meetings last week with Welsh Government included as well, and they did that on a regional basis to look at sort of Bridgend, RCT and Merthyr as to what we were doing around discharge and look at some of those areas. So we're looking to see what we can do to support health as much as we can.
Yeah, thank you all very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Richards. Going back to the budget report, I think it's important to remember that each of those numbers represent a person, a child, somebody's loved one. And obviously, we all know working with people, it can't be black and white. You are going to have those variables, and you can predict something, and like you said, they could increase. So I was just wondering, it's okay if you don't know the answer now, but I was thinking, is there an option, those areas where there is a particular high overspend, where there could be like a task and finish group inviting members to come in just to have a look at that area, or even a representative from Scrutiny to perhaps shadow a budget board. Like I said, I'm not sure if that's an option, but I think that would be something I would like to explore. But like I said, it's okay if you can't answer that now.
Okay, so budget board, obviously cabinet attend the budget board, and we are challenged on these areas where there's major variances. So I guess that's a question for cabinet as to whether Scrutiny want to attend that or can attend that. The budget meetings that we hold, sort of looking at children and adult cases and the commissioning panels, we're specifically talking sometimes about individuals, so names are used.
Right.
So that would be something we'd have to think about because of confidentiality. But certainly I'll take that away and have a think
Yeah.
about that.
But perhaps just more like a task and finish group then with Scrutiny. But yeah, thanks for considering that. Are there any other questions? Okay, any comments? No. Thank you, Lisa. Lovely. Moving on to item 4, flying start access to free childcare. And this is on page 17 to 26. So I'll hand you over to Chris and Sarah, who will outline the report.
Go green. Are we in? Okay. Thanks for that, Chair. Members will be aware that we previously brought a report on the expansion of flying start, and we followed a similar format to the previous report and followed the Welsh Government guidance in terms of the data requirements that they had in order to prioritise where those expansions should take place. And we followed that in terms of both the last report, sequentially going through the areas by priority, whilst identifying where there are childcare availability within or near to those lower super output areas. But I think in terms of that, we've set that out in the introduction and the background, but I think it's really important for members to be aware that this expansion is about the Welsh Government meeting its access to free childcare commitment. This is not about access to flying start as we would traditionally know it, because the only element that these parents will get access to is the free childcare for 2 to 3 year olds. So we've also had to do our planning differently in terms of this expansion, because we've had to do it by when children will be the year before entering school. So we've had to go into the education database and look at the difference between the termly numbers sequentially throughout the next 18 months for children as they build up towards entering school. Whereas before we'd have looked at what's the cohort of 0 to 4 year olds living in an area. We haven't been able to do that this time. So there is information in the appendices because it changes on a term by term basis, the numbers that will be in the programme. But they will not get access to things like enhanced health visiting, speech and language support, and parenting. It is only for childcare. So in terms of the way we word, obviously we've still got set out the areas that previously were flying start and not flying start. But moving on into the priority areas in terms of where we are now, this will mean an additional 88 children, I want to say, coming into the Flying Start programme who will have access to childcare. That means we're able to take in far more lower super output areas because we're talking smaller numbers of 2 to 3 year olds in each area that become eligible. So you've got there in section 5.0 a list of the areas, the LSOA areas that will be coming into the programme Flying Start, which is how Welsh Government chose to roll it out, but also the numbers that potentially are eligible for childcare per term in the table. And this includes all of the areas that we identified in the previous report, plus a number of additional areas that will come in as part of the programme. This will mean in the end, by the end of this expansion, 24 out of the 36 lower super output areas within Merthyr will have access to free childcare. We are getting to the position once that happens where with the access to childcare might become problematic in the next phase of expansion because a lot of it will be filled up. But it has its variances because 1 month a child can be in that and then the next thing they've gone into school. So it's a balancing act between the childcare, and it becomes far more problematic for Sarah and her team because they're having to monitor at such a minutiae scale in order to know where there are places available in each childcare setting or not. But at this point, we believe that the numbers that are at the bottom of the table, which would be in term 1, 72 children, term 2, 53, term 3, 66, term 4, 90, will give us the flexibility both to accommodate those children in childcare and have some outreach capacity for vulnerable families who still live outside of the dedicated Flying Start agreed areas. On top of that, Welsh Government have asked for a capital development outline plan. So we've given in section 6 there, and the difficulty with the capital outline, the capital development is Welsh Government are looking at this over the next 3 years. It probably takes about 2 years to get something built, 18 months to 2 years. So the two things are not running in parallel enough that actually it may solve all our capacity issues in the time span that they want expansion. But what we've got in the table there, you'll see, is some areas that we've identified in partnership with education around potential developments in terms of new childcare provision, a number of which are through the medium of Welsh, in line with Welsh Government's drive for increasing Welsh language provision, in order that those also tie into the plans of the Education Department around the 21st Century Schools programme. In relation to that, there's some further work that we've identified in the where we want to be. We've got a consultation that is going to be going live shortly in relation to this around changing our commissioning model. We're also looking at the further work around these capital developments, and those will progress. What I will add to this is we've already, or just prior to Christmas, we were also informed by Welsh Government there will be a phase 2B hot on the heels of this with another 77 children coming into the programme, probably by September. I think the outline plan has to be in March, end of February, beginning of March. So they're really ramping up the scale of the expansion of this to meet that commitment they've made around access to free childcare. So that's the overall elements. We continue to progress down the priority list. There's one area in there which is the Town 2 area that we've pulled forward, particularly because of the high number of children, not the percentage of children, but the high number of children who are living in that area experiencing deprivation in that particular LSOA. But that's the only exception we've made where we've stepped outside of the priority list, as the data tells us. But we still have enough capacity to be able to offer outreach provision to vulnerable families outside of dedicated Flying Start areas. But I think what's really important to understand is it's not going to be an equitable service offer. Whereas Flying Start was unequitable because you were either in a Flying Start area or not. Now it's going to be unequitable because you might be in a Flying Start area that's only got access to childcare, whereas you might be in a Flying Start area that's got access to all 4 core elements. So it's been made really complicated by Welsh Government in that respect. But that's the areas that we would seek to be expanding into are those on page 19 in the table, as directed by Welsh Government's data usage. Happy to take any questions and share.
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. Any questions?
Sorry, folks, I can't get it to go off.
No, it's fine. Councillor Garth Richards.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I'm going to be a bit parochial here, Chris. Obviously, with this current tranche, it brings 2 further areas in the Triaris ward within the Flying Start area. What I can't circle is why does it need capital investment going forward if that can accommodate at the moment?
So we have got existing provision in the area,
Yeah,
but we have to consider what the premises around that provision looks like and whether they're fit for the future. And it's only something that we're scoping at the moment. You know, there's no firm plans in place. They're tentative early discussions, but I think we need to consider we've got provision out there that perhaps we just need to be thinking 5-10 years in advance now that we've got the opportunity
Yeah.
for capital funding
Yeah.
as to whether we need to be considering premises that will see them through to longer term. And also there is a question mark over whether some areas of the Treharris 2 LSOA are within 15 minutes walking distance of the existing provision. So that's just something that we're also scoping and testing out.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I'm
that's,
trying to think where 2 is, though.
sorry.
I'm trying to think the area where 2 is.
Edwardsville.
All right, yeah.
I
see
think,
what
and I think that's the challenge we've got,
Yeah.
councillor, is that Welsh Government requirement says that all provisions should be within a 15-minute walk for parents.
Yeah,
And we've got the majority of provision in the main Treharris town area, in the community
Yeah.
centre and
Yeah.
by there. So those coming across from places like Fir Tree Drive or from Edwardsville, all of which would be in those, it's questionable whether it's 15 minutes or not. But I think we're scoping out that
Yeah.
idea of, is there other alternative premises in those different areas that would still mean we work with the existing providers and say, well, look, can't one of you work in
Yeah.
this area and another relocate to
Yeah.
other areas? Because at the moment it's all in the main Treharris area.
yeah, yeah. Thanks for that.
Any other questions, members? Okay. Mine was in relation to unfilled spaces. Can you just talk me through that? Like, do they stay vacant or can they be offered to somebody if they are happy to travel, you know, rather than just stay empty?
So our current commissioning model has evolved over time because the program's been in place now for more than 15 years and it's kind of evolved during that time. So we've got one option within the commissioning model where we have call providers, where we block purchase 40% of their CIW registered places in advance. Rather than based on the number of children who have booked in to attend. So in some instances, they haven't reached that 40% of children attending. Wherever possible, we try and maximise those places and other children will attend either on an outreach basis, but it's not always guaranteed. So by shifting the commissioning model away from block purchasing and only purchasing places as and when children book in to attend, we would be moving away from that unfilled spaces position. And we would have an equity across the whole of the commissioning, across all of the sector of how we commission and purchase places. So that's where we arrive at an unfilled spaces position at the minute, and it's not ideal because we're in essence we could be paying for something that we're not actually receiving a benefit from, a child being in that place.
I think, yeah, I think what Sarah said is we've become a victim of I say our own success in some ways, because we've managed to get every provider signed up now to Flying Start over a number of years. We moved from where we used to block book 24 places to blocking the 40% because providers were saying, look, our sustainability, if you move to a pay as you play basis, providers were concerned about their sustainability. But what we found was that some parents who might say live in the Treharris area, just as an example, might say, well, actually, I'm going into the college a number of days a week, or I work up in town. So I actually want to use a provision, a childcare provider up in the town area. I don't want to do it in my local community. So it was about we started to find what parents were saying was, okay, I want to go where's best for me, not about what's locally available. So there's been a victim of that. As we've brought more providers on board, parents have had a greater choice of where they could go. So whilst it was right at one point to have that 40% core model, it's been increasingly noted where we've had those elements of parents saying, well, no, I want to go here, I want to go there, because they may have also had children in previous settings, etc., go in different places. So it's right for us to challenge that unfilled spaces. We've driven it down significantly when we introduced the core model, that 40% booking, rather than having 24 places booked. But this will take it now to the next level. You know, there's a consultation that we've got planned with providers just to see, because there is concerns about sustainability of provision as well, if you get that voting with your feet scenario. Because we also have to take this on board with, from an education point of view, those children will be going to their local school. So it is better if their children actually attend local provision and build the relationships up with the same children that they're going to be going to school with when they transition into school. So there's a couple of factors at play in it. But from a value for money point of view, we do need to address that last element of unfilled spaces.
Thanks, for that, Chris. And I just had a second question in relation to the development of the required workforce, and especially with the Welsh language. Can you foresee any issues or barriers with that in developing the workforce, with the timescale that you've got?
Huge barriers, particularly around Welsh language. We're working closely with Cylchmaethrin in order to develop more provision in terms of that. But the reality is there are significant challenges that are already being seen across, you know, I'm going to say across Wales, but across Cwm Taf and ourselves. We're managing to maintain levels at the moment in terms of the qualified workforce. But I think as the number of settings needs to increase, it's going to be challenging, particularly within the Welsh language. Is there anything you want to add to that, Sarah?
No, I don't. I mean, only that it is being given due attention. You know, it has got a big focus. We've got a multi-agency steering group set up just to oversee the work around workforce, with Job Centre Plus, with the college, with training providers, etc., all coming together to say, you know, this is something that we need to focus on. We need to stem the tide of those people choosing to leave the sector. So we need to understand why they're leaving the sector, and, you know, with anything that's within our control, try and address that. And we need to look at the recruitment of new people into the sector, but also understanding what the demographics of our workforce is. You know, have we got an ageing workforce? You know, what does that look like, so that we can do that succession planning where needed. So it is being given due attention. There is no magic wand. But I think we just have to, you know, continue that focus on it so that we can ensure that we've got a workforce that's there for the future.
And I think in partnership with that, or in parallel with that, is whilst that recruitment of the workforce is a challenge, in the need to open up new provisions or new childcare settings, we also need to have organisations who are there to be able to take those forward, because it's not something as a local authority we wish to be delivering. We do have some existing childcare settings run by the local authority. We've tried to put them out previously through a tendering exercise. That's not been successful. We've successfully recruited 2 new organisations over the past 12 to 18 months to deliver childcare within the borough. They may want to extend their provision, we don't know. But if there are new settings coming online, they're either going to be through organisations that are already established, or through community-based organisations wishing to develop their wider service offer. So it's twofold. It's having the staff in there, but it's also having the organisations to open new provisions.
Okay, thanks for that. Any more questions? No, opening up for comments. Councillor Gath.
Chris said really regarding the historical whole package of Flying Start, but speak to the residents on the ground, it was the childcare element which they felt most important about. The fact that X lived in one street and Y lived in the street next to it. One was in the Flying Start area, one had childcare provision, and the other didn't. So that's what I've picked up since I've been elected. I'm trying to explain to residents then why they were in an area and how the areas were devised, and I still can't. I still can't work out how areas were put together. But obviously, the powers that be, ONS or whatever, who's prepared them, we have to abide by some of their decisions.
Any other comments? No, lovely. Oh,
Sorry,
great.
sorry, Chair. I was just
No, it's okay.
on the councillor hub, councillors' councillors hub, we have put a link there for all of the maps for the for you to be able to access all of the LSOA's data, the maps of areas in there for everybody's benefit to try and alleviate some of that problem.
I know I had it from Sarah, I think, years ago. I was
Yeah.
complaining of it in my email, but because I couldn't work out to some areas put together.
On the councillors hub.
Yes.
Okay, lovely. Thank you both. Okay, so moving on then to item 5, forward work programme. So the latest version now is version 5, which includes the changes to some of the scrutiny meetings in January and February. So obviously it's a living document, it can change any time. So we held our quarterly meeting looking at any emerging needs. So we had one on the 4th of January, and we looked at the forward work programme along with the cabinet work programme. So there was an item listed for March for cabinet, but after discussion with Lisa, it was agreed that that was going into council as well. So that was in relation to the 6 goals, and I know we touched on that previously when we had the report on hospital pressures. And I know we had a quick look in the quarterly meeting about some are health related with some are crossover, and then it was just for us to have a look then to see if there was any of those goals that we felt that we wanted to have a look at on the work programme, just to see what the progress is against those goals in relation to that. So that's on the forward work programme. And that's it really. So is there any questions or comments in relation to the forward work programme? No, lovely. So at this stage, I can ask officers to leave if you wanted to. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Take care. Ta-da. Okay. Item number 6, scrutiny referrals. I've had no referrals at this stage. And then item 7, report recommendations. Do we feel that we've met the recommendations of the report? So the recommendations for item 3 for the budget, it just states the content of the report to be discussed and noted. Are we happy that we done that? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Okay. And then item 4, the recommendation for the Flying Start report was the scrutiny committee discuss and debate the contents of the report and propose plans for expansion of Flying Start to provide free childcare. Are we happy we've done that? Okay. Agenda item 8, so feedback on any scrutiny activities. So we're still waiting for some dates in relation to when scrutiny can attend the Neighbourhood Learning Centre. And once I have those possible dates, I'll circulate that to everybody just to see if anybody can attend. We're also waiting for some dates in relation to some workshops in relation to children's services and adult services. And I meant to ask Lisa before she left, but I will do that after the meeting because we are still waiting for information from last scrutiny in relation to how many children are based out of county. So I'll follow that up straight after the meeting, and then I'll circulate that information to members. Is there anything anybody wanted to add or any suggestions in relation to scrutiny activities? No? Okay. And item 9 was any other business, and I have none. All right, thank you all. Take care. Cheers.